This is anonymously affiliated, your unofficial sociologist in conjunction with fair use. I'm gonna get right off into it. This is a late post. Uh, Rest in power, Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm here to sort of give a little brief history lesson, all while using some excerpts or reading some information about the beloved Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, this isn't a situation where I'm asking anyone to agree. It's not needed. However, for any information that you are able to refute that I am saying, be my guest. However, it doesn't require any emotional attachment, and this isn't a necessarily glorify or diminish the man's great work. However, we'll jump right off into it. Get a few things in order here. We can begin with how Good Brother was linked to certain organizations, and possibly some of those organizations were deemed unsavory, linking them to what is to be considered radical organizations. However, as this information reads, in 1957, King attended a weekend event in honor of the Highlanders' 25th anniversary. Among those in attendance were representatives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, looking for proof that King and the Highlanders were breaking the law. A few weeks later, the Georgian Commission on Education published a pamphlet entitled Highlander Folk School Communist Training School. This pamphlet claimed that there was a ample proof that Highlander, as well as the entire civil rights movement, was communist in origin. That some would say he wasn't no communist. All right, I would say this, and I'll probably repeat this again during this recording. I'm not a gangbanger, so I don't hang around gangbangers. Not a thief, so I don't hang around thieves. I'm not a communist, so I don't hang around communists. What else? I no longer play football, so I don't even hang around football players. So I mean that's just to clear the air as far as that goes. He was I remember him and one of his aces, Abernathy. He was also in this picture, and I'll be sure to try to include some of this information in the description. That way you can, look it up for yourselves or try to find something to refute what I'm saying. Yes, the man did a great work. There's no doubt of that. Also, I'm sure that the man has had long, agonizing nights with threats to his family and himself and many others he, you know, cared about. I'm sure that's just how white folk behaved in those days, openly. However, I think initially the brother was, on to something pretty good. And for whatever reason, I believe that it was hijacked. And it wasn't just by one, they was converged on our sides. So, not that I'm, just here to be in support of the civil rights movement, neither nor against it. I don't have an official position. So, we have an excerpt here of the movie called Boycott. It's in 2001. It's Martin Luther King meets Bayard Rustin. After this clip here, what I'll do is read some brief information on Bayard Rustin and sort of, sum up what he was about. Here's the clip.
But who are you? Bayard Rustin. What are you doing here? Why'd you come all the way down here from New York City? Business trip. You here to stir up something with that nigga Boycott? Well, I do intend to avoid the buses. What kind of business you do at night? I'm a journalist. I am working for the Figaro and the Manchester Guardian. Those are European journals, newspapers. Is there anything else?
That was Bayard Rustin being approached by the police as he's walking from his hotel to Dr. King's house. And as he's approached to the house, he gets this, or he gets greeted like this.
What do you want? I'm here to see Dr. King. Need to go on home? My home is a long way from here, and I don't really care to return to it at the moment since I just left it to come to Montgomery to see Dr. King. Reverend King's not seeing any visitors.
And those individuals that you hear are the deacons of defense. See, because prior to Bayard Rustin, Dr. King and others were actually armed. Why? The man is receiving death threats. Now, I want to know really and truly how much influence did this brother have on Dr. King? But let's go.
Now go on.
Nelson, who is it?
That's Sister Coretta.
Nobody, ma'am. Somebody just leaving. You can come back in the morning. Good evening, Mrs. King. Bayard Rustin.
Bayard Rustin.
As you, that was her welcoming him into their home, and they have a brief conversation, and she shares with him what sort of impression he had on her being Byron Rustin and her being Sister Coretta when she was in school and where he spoke. he made a speech where she attended, and I guess she, rather enjoyed his words. However, sort of getting to the actual meat with Dr. King and Mr. Rustin.
Well, the blind Rustin is here, and I guess we've arrived.
Dr. King, I wouldn't miss a moment that's going to change our country forever.
Yes, yes. So, policeman says to him, says, well, can you describe these turtles? And Snell says, no, sir, I can't. It all happened so fast. Well, see, that's how we feel. Here we are, 77 days into a one-day boycott.
You managed to sow the seeds of Gandhi in the soil of the South.
Well, it's not just about Gandhi. It's also about the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Mass action and black social gospel. It's a new form of protest. I mean, it's Negro. It's jazz.
Well, whatever it is, it's taken us all by surprise.
Not just take the whole country by surprise. That's why I'm here. I'll be blunt. You're straying from the principles of nonviolence.
You know what?
You're the leader of a nonviolent movement. And yet you have guns in your home and these armed guards outside.
Let me ask you something, Mr. Rustin. Would you risk your family for a tactic?
Nonviolence is not a tactic.
Would you risk your family?
Nonviolence is an ideology.
I have an obligation to protect my family and defend my
religion.
Well, the guns don't make me feel any safer.
And Sister Coretta, right on time, if you follow what I was saying previously on what influence this individual had on Dr. King. Now, mind you, according to the movie, this is the first meeting or them first, really encountering themselves. Who knows? But this is a movie, and it is depicted of how the Montgomery Boy Boycott took place. And I will agree that that bit of zeal, because it took some zeal in order to accomplish that. So once they got that, I don't know why they went away from boycotting. And after they got victory, should have probably focused more on creating their own bus line transportation. I mean, I don't know. But I just know once that took place, that those black companies, after they won, got the boycott was over. Those black companies, so to speak, transportation and otherwise, they eventually went out of business. So I don't understand the part where they, it's where they where they had a misstep at. So I don't get that. But let's read some information about old Bayard Rustin. Just brief background on Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was an African American leader in social movements for civil rights, socialism, nonviolence, and guess what? Gay rights. Now, I don't know if any straight man, and if any straight man is actually fighting for gay rights, that's not a straight man. So, if you haven't figured it out yet, that, uh, yeah, Bayard Rustin was openly gay. That wasn't a secret. He also worked with A. Philip Randolph on the March on Washington movement in 1941. They don't necessarily talk about the March on Washington in 1941, but they do highlight King and the Civil Rights Movement. Now, mind you, Bayard Rustin as well was one of the main organizers. Now, why wouldn't Bayard Rustin be attached to this? Seeing as that he already got experience with the March on Washington, so therefore he was one of the main organizers of the March on Washington. Dr. King, as great as he was, he's only one man, so he can't fill every single position or see to it himself every objective is complete. So yeah, Bayard Rustin, old buddy. And eventually at one point, or at a certain point, he and others abandoned Dr. King once the quote movement or they got what they want. However, after those who attached themselves, like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, and you know, figureheads in the movement, they abandoned the brother. And here is an excerpt that I would use in the clip with MLK talks new phase of civil rights struggle 11 months before his assassination. Let's go.
When you stood on the Lincoln Memorial that day in August '63, and you said I had a dream, did that dream envision that you could see a war in Asia preventing the federal government doing for the Negroes, preventing the society doing for the Negroes, that which you think had to be done?
No, I didn't envision that then. I must confess that that period was a great period of hope for me. And I'm sure for many others all across the nation, many of the Negroes who had about lost hope, saw a solid decade of progress in the South. And in 1954, which was, 64, 1963, 9 years after the Supreme Court's decision to be in the March on Washington, meant a great deal. It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping.
And for those who hope, just to enlighten you, hope is delayed. Excuse me. Hope is delayed disappointment. And I'm wondering why would he make that statement of regret? I wonder why.
I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul searching and agonizing moments. And I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil. which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation.
Superficial in a sense to where you're allowing yourself, you're subjecting yourself to be beaten simply because you want to go somewhere where you're not wanted. I don't get that part. Because before that, black people were going where they were allowed. They weren't trying to get in places or in spaces where they wanted. I mean, right now, in contemporary times, you still cannot go places where you're not wanted. That's why they have signs up say members only. That's the same thing. Private school, same thing. Now, do people from other ethnic backgrounds attend private schools? Yes. Are they part of members only clubs or organizations? Yes. However, even back then, black people, so called, had their own organizations that it was black only, black owned, black operated. How did we get away from that? I don't know. And I try to comprehend it and not from a place where I was taught by the school system, not operating from that arena, using my own brain and thought processes. And it's still puzzling to this day. I don't get it. Now someone can explain it and articulate it, but they're not necessarily going to sound freely. They're going to speak in a manner, way in which they were taught, or way in which that they got it from a news reel or word of mouth by somebody else, instead of just taking just a little time to think like, oh, why would they, pose the question, kind of like a philosopher, because that's part of uh, Dr. King's makeup. He's a philosopher, bachelor's degree in sociology, PhD in theology, or what you call bachelor's degree in social sciences, sociology, social science, tomato, tomato. Now, in what's the year? Civil Rights Bill. Civil Rights Bill of 1866. What? Yeah, they don't teach that one neither. They glance right over that. So how is it in 1866 a civil rights bill was passed April 9th, 1866, and then we get to 1964 and we advocating for another civil rights bill? Sound like the brothers got took. Let me read this. This is from historyhouse.gov. On this date, the House overrode President Andrew Johnson's veto of the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, which near unanimous Republican support, 122 to 41, marking the first time Congress legislated upon civil rights, first introduced by Senate Judiciary Chairman Lyman, what's say, yeah, just say Lyman or Lyman of Illinois. The bill mandated that all persons born in the United States, with the exception of American Indians, were hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. The legislation granted all citizens the full and equal benefit of the laws and proceedings for the security of person and property. The two radical Republicans who believed that the federal government had a role in shaping a multiracial society in the post-war South, the measure seemed next the next logical step after the ratification of 13th Amendment. So with the abolishing of slavery, the slaves were granted citizenship. Now I can assume at that point, because they were slaves, they didn't have money, so they couldn't necessarily afford the weapons to be able to sustain or protect themselves, neither nor the proper tools to be able to necessarily sustain themselves without having to actually go back to the plantation, which actually brought up the sharecropping. So they let them go from chattel slavery to sharecropping in a sense will which evolved into monetary slavery. But let's hear Dr. King speak about this.
From the bondage of physical slavery, but at the same time the nation refused to give him land to make that freedom meaningful. And at that same period, America was giving millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that America was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe.
I'm wondering why. Because those were the same white peasants that helped to raid, rape, pillage to seize this land. And they knew if they didn't give them white folks something, they'll be at their house in the middle of the night because they wanted they just do. Come on, let's go. That's why they did that.
With an economic floor that would make it possible to grow and develop, refused to give that economic floor to its black peasants, so to speak.
I wonder why. Possibly because it wouldn't have been enough of those so-called black people thinking like them white people. And those that subject to think like those white people, meaning like show up at your house at night, too few in number.
This is why Frederick Douglass could say that emancipation for the Negro was freedom to hunger, freedom to the winds and rains of heaven, freedom without roofs to cover their heads. He went on to say that it was freedom without bread to eat, freedom without land to cultivate. It was freedom and famine at the same time. It does not stop there. In 1875, the nation passed the Civil Rights Bill.
I just read that it's 1866. However, he's off on the date. However, he's on point with what he's about to go with.
Refused to enforce it. In 1964, the nation passed a weaker Civil Rights Bill.
Weaker.
Even to this day, that bill has not been totally enforced in all of its dimensions.
And I'll tell you why. Because just like before them white folk, when they lost their property, will be willing to enforce what they believed in or what was owed to them, the government got ahead of that. Not so much with the black people, because for some reason they knew that these black people weren't going to behave like those in which that show up at your house at night.
Nation heralded a new day of concern for the poor, for the poverty-stricken, for the disadvantaged, and brought into being a poverty bill. But at the same time, it put such little money into the program that it was hardly and still remains hardly a good skirmish against poverty. White politicians in suburbs talk eloquently against open housing, and in the same breath contend that they are not racist. Now, all of this and all of these things tell us that America has been backlashing on the whole question of basic constitutional and God-given rights for Negroes and other disadvantaged groups for more than 300 years.
Now that ought to tell you something. However, I will share with you that them same white folk, along with black folk who is experiencing poverty, this government, Roosevelt put out the New Deal, Social Security Act, you know, things of that nature to actually still help those white people. See, it wasn't until possibly the 40s, after they didn't burn down all the towns that were specifically black owned from the 20s up until, and it wasn't like they still weren't being terrorized, because even Dr. King was being terrorized before they actually went mainstream with the movement. They were receiving benefits. It wasn't until the housing bill and food stamps and stuff of that nature to where black people start receiving that around like the late 50s, 60s type stuff, or early 50s, the 60s. I know this is a late post. However, this is a brief history of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, I didn't hit on everything because somebody will say, "Well, why you ain't talk about how the FBI had his phones tapped?" Yeah, that's just because they were just trying to discredit him, trying to stop his momentum. So whatever he was doing behind closed doors, so to speak, essentially was his business and between him and his wife. So that's off the table. Uh, what else? I wish someone could actually explain to me where did they actually drop the ball, because during this boycott situation, you had the older people who got behind that boycott. When no kids going to work, by then the child labor laws were, you know, sort of different. They wasn't as laxed as it was in the 1900s, 1800s and stuff. So I go from being the elders or the adults supporting the movement to the youth. I I don't know, but anyways, I hope, and like I said, hope is delayed disappointment. However, I won't be disappointed if no one agrees with me. However, I hope this actually reaches some like-minded individuals who are not intellectual midgets and comprehend what has been propagated pertaining to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. Again, I would state this was a great man and he did a great work. However, you hear it in his own words, and I say it for him. Seeing he's not here to speak for himself, I say it for him. We should have been using a different playbook. Can't say new because there's nothing new under the sun. So we should have been strategizing different. And I think initially before he solely committed to nonviolence, like that Dick Gregory stated that he was an extreme nonviolent person to the point where he wouldn't even raise his hand to defend himself. Now you know you got to be some sort of zealous individual to believe in the ideology or philosophy, or as Bayard Rustin put in the movie or stated in the movie, it's a religion. But and religion is basically something that you practice. Just to make that clear. So you got to be some sort of crazy, because even the child got sense enough when you spank him and put his hands behind his or her hands on her bottom. But this is something which they're trying to teach us like, nah, don't even defend yourself while this person is cracking you over your head. Don't even do that. I just didn't get why that was an option. But like I say, the man did a great work. He did instill some level of courage and bravery to stand up to the power structure. I give him credit for that. But just so in the future, you guys will look at this bit of information and see that that was not the correct play in order to get to where they were trying to go to. This is anonymously affiliated, your unofficial sociologist, signing off.